Welcome to another in the series of Catch My Drift mini talks with Macduff Marine Aquarium. My name is Marie Dare and I'm the learning officer here at the aquarium. And today I'll be talking to you a little bit about kelp. Now, kelp is one of the dominant features in this tank behind me, which represents a kelp reef habitat. Kelp is a large brown algae, and it's like a plant in a lot of ways. So I've got a bit of kelp that I collected from the high tide mark to show you what a bit of kelp looks like. So we've got the holdfast, which is like a root system. We've got the stipe, which is like the stem, and we've got the frond, which would be like the leaves of a plant. So when conditions are right, that is a rocky seabed, kelp can grow in large numbers and produce what we call a kelp forest. So it's much like a forest on land. It's a large amount of kelp growing in an area, and it provides one of the most productive and diverse habitats that you'll find in the marine environment. And just like a plant, kelp requires sunlight to grow. So generally, they're only found in quite shallow conditions. You'll find kelp growing from below the low tide mark all the way to about 20 meters or so in depth, deeper if the water is very clear. Now, kelp needs a hard surface to grow on, as I mentioned, so you'll find them growing in rocky habitats all around the UK. In fact, the UK has the highest diversity of kelp species of any European country, and we boast 7 of the 14 species of kelp that can be found within Europe. Now, the type of kelp depends on the level of wave exposure in the area. So in very rough areas where there's lots of wave action, you'll find a winged kelp. And in areas where it's slightly more sheltered, but there's still quite a lot of turbulence in the water, you'll find oarweed or cuvee kelp. And in extremely sheltered bays, you'll find sugar kelp. Now, the main type of kelp in the tank behind me is cuvee kelp. And our tank is actually ideal for growing kelp because it's very unique. It's the only tank of its kind in the UK, or the largest tank of its kind in the UK, as it's open to the elements at the top. So it gets natural sunlight, meaning that it has perfect conditions for kelp to grow. Underneath the growing kelp, under the canopy of kelp, you have lots of different animals and, in fact, other seaweeds that can make their home. So you find hundreds of types of fish, many crustaceans and sponges and sea squirts, and loads of starfish and urchins as well. As I mentioned, it's a very, very diverse habitat. Now, the holdfast of the kelp itself is where it anchors to the rocky substrate. But if you have a close look there, you can see that it has lots of nooks and crannies, and these provide living spaces for hundreds of individual animals. There's anywhere between 30 and 70 different species of animals that will colonize a single kelp holdfast. It has everything that they need. It can provide shelter, a food source, and then also great places of attachment for eggs. So you'll find larger fish that don't actually live within the holdfast, but they will attach their eggs to them. So things like scorpionfish, lumpsuckers, and even cat sharks will swim around the stipe of the kelp to attach their eggs to the kelp so that they're secured. The stipe itself is quite rough to prevent other things from growing on the kelp, but as you can see with this bit of kelp that I have here, it actually has another type of algae growing on it already. So other algae and bryozoans, sea mats and sea furs and stuff will grow on kelp as well. Urchins as well will climb the stipe of the stalk in calm weather, and they will graze on the frond, as that's a favorite food source of urchins. They are very fond of kelp. And then as we move on to the blade of the kelp, it actually secretes a natural mucus, and that's to help prevent other animals from colonizing it. Although it has this protection, by the end of summer, you'll still find loads of different epiphytes. That's animals that live on top of other things, colonizing the frond. So what happens is that the end of winter and into early spring, the kelp will actually shed that frond and all of the attached animals will drift away. In fact, there is a species of mollusk called a blue-rayed limpet. It's a tiny little snail that grazes and lives on the kelp, and it will actually migrate down the stipe to overwinter in the holdfast so that it's not lost as the frond is shed. Now, those fronds that drift off into the currents, they either get eaten by animals or they're broken down by bacteria, and so the nutrients are recycled and can be used for next season's growth. The thick floating forest of kelp, so the big canopy that floats closer to the surface of the water, provides shelter for lots of juvenile fish. And so it's a very important habitat for commercial fisheries because lots of young fish will seek refuge here. And of course, because there's lots of smaller fish, larger fish come in to feed on them, and the larger fish attract predators like seals. And so it's a bustling and diverse habitat. So kelp forests are vitally important not only to wildlife but also to humans. They have been used for hundreds of years in the form of fertilizer. So potash was a fertilizer that was spread on the crops for a very, very long time, and it would provide vital nutrients for the farmland. And in addition to that, kelp was also used in medicine. Iodine was extracted from kelp, and that was a very important medicinal product for quite a number of years. Nowadays, we still extract kelp commercially, but we use a chemical called alginates that's manufactured out of the kelp. And alginates are used in a wide variety of industries, from textiles and pharmaceuticals to food manufacturing. It's used as a stabilizer in lots of different products that we use every day, so you'd be surprised at how much kelp you've probably consumed. It's found in things from toothpaste to tomato ketchup, the sticky stuff on the back of stamps, and also beer and ice cream. So lots of kelp in some of our diets. The kelp forest itself is also very important in cycling nutrients in the marine environment and in acting as a carbon sink. So kelp, as it's taking the energy from the sun, it's making sugars, it's growing very, very quickly, and so it's capturing lots of the carbon dioxide from our atmosphere and it's storing it up in the fronds. And so it's very important in capturing that carbon. About 75% of the carbon that's stored in the marine environment is actually captured by kelp forests. Now, as climate change becomes more of a daily reality, kelp becomes more important in protecting our coastlines, because much as a forest of trees could act as a windbreak to shelter us from a storm, the kelp forest acts in the same way to protect the coastline from turbulent seas. So as climate change increases the severity and frequency of storms, kelp reefs are becoming more and more important in helping to protect the coastline. So that's a little bit about kelp. I hope you enjoyed listening and that you agree it's a fascinating organism and it provides a diverse and wonderful habitat that has lots of benefits for wildlife and humans alike. Do look out for the next in the series of Catch My Drift Talks, and we'll see you again soon.